Welcome. Welcome members, guests, and speakers. Thank you all for attending in person and online. For our February general meeting, we've invited an expert panel to cover an important issue: solutions for housing and homelessness, affordability and availability. Thanks to Gigi Brandt and Shauna Bona for helping to arrange this panel. As is our tradition, the League of Women Voters of Salt Lake would like to begin tonight's meeting by acknowledging that we are gathering on Indigenous land. The Salt Lake Valley has always been a gathering place for Indigenous peoples, and we acknowledge that this land, which was named for the Ute people, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute nations, and is a crossroads for Indigenous people. We pay respect to the elders past and present. We also consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that are our history and legacy, and seek to uncover the truth. For 100 years, the League of Women Voters has been a nonpartisan, activist grassroots organization that believes voters should play a critical role in democracy. We encourage informed and active participation in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Simply put, our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. Tonight, before our meeting, we would like to honor a former League leader who has recently passed away, Irene Fisher. Irene Fisher was president of the Salt Lake League of Women Voters many years ago and led the Equal Rights Coalition of the 1970s. The League launched her into a plethora of exciting, dedicated service opportunities. She directed Utah Issues, a nonprofit voice for Utahns in need. While at Utah Issues, she created the organization now known as Voices for Utah Children. She was the founding director of the Lowell Benyon Community Service Center at the University of Utah. She and several students, many of whom are now community leaders, created the framework for an organization that has influenced the lives of thousands of university students and Utah residents. She was also the founding director of University Neighborhood Partners, an organization at the U that brings the talents and experiences of Salt Lake residents together with university students and faculty. She received an honorary doctorate from the U for her exceptional service to the community and the university. She continued her advocacy for less fortunate among us by serving on the Board of Trustees for Intermountain Healthcare and the Board of Utah Humanities. She was a recipient of too many awards to mention. I was hearing a podcast the other day about the importance of having awe in our lives and being in touch with ourselves spiritually. And the speaker said that the most frequent reason that people experience awe is recognizing kindness and excellent service by others. And Irene serves as an example for all of us in that regard. Next, we would like to acknowledge 13 new individuals who have joined the League in December and January. If you are present here tonight, stand, or if you are online, put a note in the Q&A. Dawn Garrett, Sherry Whitwer, Charlene Weir, Amber Partridge, Nancy Cantor, Joan Gregory, Ann Riordan, Sue Watson, Kristen Rogers Iverson, Teresa Maloney, Cynthia Adams, Marie Jackson, Haley Keller. Welcome, and we hope to get you involved doing various service activities in the near future. A recording of tonight's events will be made available to the public on the League of Women Voters of Salt Lake website and on social media. Other recordings of this event, whether they be in person or at a computer screen, may not be used without the express written approval of the League. The League will only allow audio-video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, except by media reporting on this event. There will be other important League announcements at the end of this evening's presentation. For those of you joining us online, you can use the Q&A function to ask questions that will later be read to the panelists. The chat function is not operational, and because this is a webinar, not a web meeting, you are not going to be able to verbally ask questions. But we look for your participation after the speakers' presentations. We have a panel of 3 experts. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order, and then we'll launch into their presentations. Janice Kimball has 25 years working with nonprofit organizations that serve homeless and poverty populations. She is currently serving as the Chief Executive Officer for Housing Connect, formerly the Housing Authority of the County of Salt Lake. Housing Connect provides housing assistance to over 5,000 low-income households each year, including over 500 formerly homeless and special needs households. Prior to joining Housing Connect, Janice was the Director of Shelter Operations for the Road Home, where she oversaw daily operations as well as coordinated the winter overflow shelter and services. Janice has her Master's of Social Work degree from the University of Utah. Tara Rollins is the first Executive Director of Utah Housing Coalition. Through education, advocacy, and community partnerships, the Utah Housing Coalition is dedicated to promoting equitable and sustainable communities to ensure all Utahns have a safe and affordable place to call home. Under Tara's leadership for the past 18 years, the coalition has grown to over 125 members, significantly increasing tenant rights, promoted housing education, and became a strong and respected advocacy organization in the state. Prior to working at UHC, Tara worked at Assist Inc., an organization dedicated to helping low-income homeowners with emergency home repairs. Tara holds a BS in Interdisciplinary Health, Recreation, and Physical Education from Plymouth State College. Finally, Bill Tibbitts, Associate Director of Crossroads Urban Center. Crossroads is a nonprofit grassroots organization that assists and organizes Utahns with low incomes to meet basic survival needs and to address essential issues affecting quality of life. Among Crossroads activities are running Utah's busiest emergency food pantry, operating a thrift store, and sponsoring the Coalition of Religious Communities in its advocacy work around hunger and homelessness. Bill has worked at Crossroads, ultimately advancing to the position of Associate Director since he graduated from the University of Utah College of Law in 2001. The speakers will each present on the topic of problems and solutions to housing access and affordability. Then I may pose some questions to them. Finally, we will take questions from the audience. And those of you online should put the questions in the Q&A. Let's start with Janice Kimball, who I think has a PowerPoint. So we may not get to keep watching our guests, and we may get to see a PowerPoint.
Thank you very much. So I'm Janice Kimball. I am the CEO for Housing Connect, and we are the housing authority for Salt Lake County. And we're a little different than most nonprofit housing providers in that we have a dual mission. One is that we provide services to low-income households, but we also have a task to work with communities to solve their affordable housing, to meet their goals and to solve their issues. We serve about 5,000 households every year. Our focus is on individuals who are extremely low income. So our average income is just under $15,000. And we've made it a priority to target, prioritize resources for homeless. I'm going to start with just talking a little bit about what is affordable housing. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and it can be a bit confusing. So affordable housing is defined by HUD as being as serving individuals under 80% area median income. But it is also a term used to define what is affordable for a household. So um, housing would be defined as affordable if it were 30% of somebody's income or below. And so we're seeing quite a bit of stress on those markets. We're seeing people, housing prices go up. One of the things I did want to point out is we're starting to hear the term housing affordability. And when that term is used, it's usually including higher income groups. So it's including, up to 120% AMI. And it's at this point in a market, it's not that that's not needed, but people should be aware that it may not be serving those who are the most vulnerable or the most at risk of being homeless. So I'm on slide number 4. Sorry, I did not do what I was instructed and signal moving slides along, so I apologize for that. So right now, we do have a housing crisis, and it's not our community. I'm sure you guys all know it's across the country, and it's really twofold. We have a lack of units. All of the points going into the housing market are stressed. There aren't enough new homes being built. There aren't enough existing homes to meet the demand of people wanting to buy the homes. And we do not have anywhere close to the number of multifamily units we need, particularly those targeting the extremely low income or individuals at 30% AMI and below. And there's a couple of reasons there are a couple of barriers to increasing those demands. And I think it comes down to zoning or land, and it comes down to the cost or money. Also, we also have rent assistance that's available, but we don't have it at the scale that we need it. So right now there's about 40,000 households who qualify for rent assistance. And if you're looking at this Section 8 program statewide, you've got about 11,000 units. So next slide, please. The other thing is there's a discrepancy. So either the cost of housing is more than what people make. And we've seen the cost of housing go up pretty significantly the last couple of years. We put together a grant application not too long ago. And since 2000, the housing prices had gone up about 119%, and the wages have not kept pace anywhere near. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tara. I've got a slide here that just shows like what a current fair market rent would be. And if for those of you who are renting, you know that these are modest prices. Rents are going for a lot higher than that. But next to it, you have the amount of money a household would need to make to be able to afford those. So we're really pricing out people on fixed income, people lower wage jobs. And this is a slide from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, which is a fantastic resource if you're not aware of that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tara.
Good evening. I'm Tara Rollins, and we at the coalition are a membership-based organization, and these couple of our members here. And I always say that I'm not the expert in housing, that I facilitate the experts and making sure that people at the right meetings and being able to speak on the issues that they have around housing and also supporting the housing. We have a lot of members that are actually, in the dirt, making it happen. So Janice talked about deeply affordable housing, 30% of AMI. And I wanted to just give you an idea of who that is. And 45% of the people are in the labor force. And as you can see, disabled is 20%, and they're going to need, help for the rest of their lives, because people who are disabled most likely are not working or just have a lower wage. And our seniors. So as you can see, the need is great. And when you're looking at the inventory of housing, when you're looking at the 0% to extremely low income, which is the 30% of AMI, there's only 33 households available for every 100 in need. And when you go up, you can see, 0 to 50%, 0 to 80%, and then up to 100%. So we should not be putting subsidy or government money into above 80% of AMI. And we should be really focusing on the lowest income to get into housing. And so as you can see, Janice had indicated that, if you're paying more than 30% of your income, you're, setting yourself up to fail in terms of having a hiccup, flat tire, not being able to get to work. Landlords need to be paid. And so when somebody's extremely low income and they're paying, more than 50% of their income to housing, and as you can see by this chart, it's quite high. The many people that are. I wanted to put this slide together because I wanted to show you actually how many low wage jobs that we actually have. And so we have over 300,000 jobs that are paying less than $16.57 an hour. And in order to afford a one-bedroom house, the housing wage is $16.71. So some of the most important people that are in our community that are helping our economy, in tourism, the people that we depended so deeply on when we were in the COVID crisis, the people who clean the hospitals, healthcare and personal care aides, nursing assistants, retail. These are all people that helped our, community stay alive, but yet they can't afford to be living in our community. And many of these people had children at home. They can't afford internet, while a majority of the state was home, comfortable working. So what happens when people can't afford their housing? We have a very fast eviction process, and we put this pyramid together a couple years ago just to kind of get a feeling of eviction and what does it mean for somebody. So when somebody enters at the bottom, they're paying application fees and multiple application fees, and there's no control system in place for a landlord to, somebody control it. We have no idea how many applications are being paid for because they don't have to record any of that stuff. And so there's a lot of money going out in that fashion. And then when somebody moves in, there's a lease initiation, the deposit, the rent. Most places are making sure that you have your media system and paying for that. Carport, you have to pay for your parking now. Valet trash is not on here, but that's another one. DNA for your dog. And so all these fees add up. And then you get a 3-day pay or vacate. And so right now, you either pay or you vacate. And so every day you stay afterwards, then you pay 3 times the daily rent. And so as you can see, it went up from $1,600 to over $5,000 in just a short period of time. And so when you look at some of the other things that they charge, eviction turnover, a notice fee, the late fee, future rent. So when you take all that and then it goes up to an augmented judgment, that's when after somebody moves out and they may do some damage, and so they're going to add more to it. And then it goes up, and most leases say it's 24% until paid off, or it goes into collection. So as you can see, I always call it financial crippling. And so I got these numbers from the Apartment Association last July, and I just remembered about it today, and I'm like, I'm going to pull this up. And so as you can see, before the pandemic, we had over 7,000 a year evictions, and then it went down in 2020, 2021, but it's fastly going up, as you can see in the next slide. What I did was I took the amount of evictions, and if you averaged out 2022, then it was quite high. And as you can see, our household size is 2.99. So how many people are affected by that? And as you can see, each year, how many people have been. And most likely, the head of household definitely will not be able to rent unless they have taken care of the eviction judgment. So why is it important to look at the household size? Because McKinney-Vento students, they're defined a little bit differently than HUD. And so each year they do a count in the school system. And if the person is doubled up, tripled up, living in the car, they don't have to be in the shelter to be counted. So this past October, we have over 15,000 children that are under that definition. So then when I put some money to it, I started thinking about it. So I put a low amount there. 4,000 is low because I see it up to $10,000, $12,000. $1,000. So if you look at, 2017, if the average eviction was $4,000, then, it's almost $30 million that, goes into a debt. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening at the Capitol. And if anybody would like to get on my mailing list, put it in the chat and I'll get that. And we send out an update every week about what's happening with the bills that we follow. And in the Q&A, there's a website and there's a link that you can click on, and it shows all the bills that we're following. And then if you click on the bill, it will tell you where the bill's at. And it's a great tool to be able to follow legislation. But this year we were really fortunate to have the governor work with the Commission on Housing Affordability and really take the information that group put out and recognize that this was a good investment for the state. And so right now we have, some bills out there with these appropriation requests in. And when I send out my update, this is there. And then also there's links to all of this. And you can see who's requesting it, who's going to use it, what does the budget look like. But I think the most important thing that we could advocate for right now is that $100 million for deeply affordable housing. And when you're talking about deeply affordable housing, it is 30% or below. And what they're trying to do is make sure that there's wraparound services for that particular type of housing, permanent supportive housing. And that's what we really need to move the needle with our homeless that are in our shelters and on our street. But also, which is impressive amount of money, is Only Walker, and that's the fund that is used to build housing. And so, there's also a study on low barrier non-congregate shelter planning, I think is really another great piece to be looking at. And then the extension of the Utah low income tax credit is another big item that would definitely complement the federal credit. So as you can see, there's also home, set asides for rural and home repairs, and also first-time home buyer for firefighters and teachers. And then there's been a bunch of other requests that are not in the governor's budget that are important to these organizations. And so, I put this together as well so people can follow where that's at. And so right now where things are at in the appropriations is the social services has already gone through the list, and they prioritize, what should be funded. And now it went to the executive appropriations. And so they'll be, working on a much larger list. And it's important to reach out to the executive appropriations at this point and let them know that housing is important and that we should be invested in the future, if that's how you feel. And so I wanted to bring up, Janice had indicated that the National Low Income Housing Coalition is a great resource. And when you want to be talking about housing, they give you a lot of talking points. They do an out of reach report that breaks down the data that Janice used and I used in terms of, what the housing wage is. It changes every year. And also, this is the out of reach report that comes out the once a year that does that. And so that's me. Yeah, please. Oh, she's putting the link in for the tracking of the bills.
So yeah, my name is Bill Tibbitts. I work at Crossroads Urban Center. I stayed home from work yesterday because I had a cold, was coughing all day. I thought I was better today until I go in public, and now I'm coughing again. Sorry. This is really fun to be here today because as we were going through people's bios and things, I thought with Janice's bio, I realized I think she's been involved with the nonprofit sector longer than it says, because every time we talk about her at Crossroads Urban Center, we talk about her being the board chair. And so she is somebody who every time I present with her, I try to do my best, because she's known how I'm supposed to do my job for longer than I've had it. Thinking about the many legacies of Irene Fisher, and I realized that where I first really got to know Tara was when we were both on the Utah Issues Board of Directors way back when Utah Issues existed. And so, again, a colleague, somebody who I've worked with for a long time. It's great. In my bio, it mentions that I graduated from the College of Law at the University of Utah. It doesn't mention that my favorite professor who I took the most classes from is the moderator for this panel, Linda Smith. So if I seem nervous, it's because everybody I'm presenting with are people I respect and admire. So this is great to be here. Crossroads Urban Center was created in 1966 when the Methodist Women Organization at that time, I don't know what they were called, but there was because the Methodist Church did a merger with another denomination shortly after this, and so it was a different name, but they decided that the building that they had been using as a boarding house for Methodist women who were in the city usually to go to college they didn't want to use it for that anymore. They wanted to create a community center for the low-income neighborhood that the building was located in, because at that time downtown Salt Lake had not been gentrified. It was one of the highest poverty neighborhoods in the state. We have, and so our main Our longest running food pantry is in downtown Salt Lake still. It is no longer a high poverty neighborhood, but it is a neighborhood that's near a lot of resources low income people use. We have another food pantry that is on Indiana Avenue in Poplar Grove neighborhood, and we're across the street from our thrift store. And so every day, Monday through Saturday, in one of our facilities, we are seeing people who are struggling with hunger, who are having trouble getting enough clothing. At our thrift store, we give away 11 items for everyone that we sell. So we primarily give away clothing at our thrift store. At all of our facilities, we saw a dramatic increase in the number of people we were serving last year. In our food pantries in particular, we had a 75% increase in the number of people we served. And we're really concerned because during the pandemic, they enhanced the supplemental nutrition assistance program benefit for families. So that everybody got the maximum benefit amount, which on average worked out to about $80 per person in the household increase. And they would get that extra $80 per person at the end of each month. The last of those payments is at the end of this month, because an act of Congress last month put an end to that. And so we are very concerned what's going to happen, at the end of next month, when families that had for a couple years now had been relying on that money to be able to make their ends meet when they stop getting it. So that's Crossroads Urban Center. That's what we do. I think this is actually an incredibly timely time for talking about solutions to homelessness, because one of the biggest moments in the calendar, the annual calendar in terms of policy is the 45 days where the Utah legislature meets. Tara was talking a lot about, was about the, I'm gonna say her name 3 different ways before we're done today. I don't know why I'm doing that. But during those 45 days, they do a lot of things. And as was pointed out, I mean, there's a lot of that involves the budget. What's really impressive this year is that we have some truly significant proposals that were first put in the governor's budget. Well, actually, they originated in the state's Commission on Housing Affordability, of which one of the commissioners is right here. So blame Janice. It's her fault that there are $149 million in housing proposals being discussed at the legislature this session. I think what we have been focused on, right? I am the staff person for a project called the Coalition of Religious Communities. Back in the 1990s, we realized that there were all of these congregations that were donating food to our food pantry every week or every month. And that a lot of those congregations had a strong emphasis theologically or ethically on social justice, and were very interested in not just helping to feed people who are hungry or to give clothes to people who need clothing, but in actually being advocating for policy solutions. And so that coalition has worked on a lot of different things since it was created in 1994. But I think our big focus for the last 4 or 5 years has been on solutions to homelessness for families with children. And we decided to focus on that for a couple reasons. One was it actually started when they when they moved the families out of the downtown shelter. It was clear that there weren't going to be enough beds for all the families. They had for all the families with children. They moved the families with children out of the downtown shelter before they moved everyone else out. So they moved them out a year early. There were not enough beds. And at that time, they said, well, we'll make up the difference with motel vouchers. They had initially 40 motel vouchers that they were using every week. They got that down to 10. by doing various things to try to get people into housing faster. Janice probably knows more details about what those things were than I do, but what I know is that this year, the 10 vouchers a week were not enough, and starting in August, and then in September and October, and even into November, there were families being turned away from the shelter system. And so we, as a coalition, were very pleased to see a proposal to put more money into the deeply affordable housing fund that was created last year, because it's been so impressive. I mean, there's FAST and then there's state government FAST, right? And the fact was that the money that was appropriated last year was put into play by September, and there are projects that were funded last year. I mean, and the state fiscal year begins on July 1st. So there were projects that couldn't have been funded before July that are actually hopefully going to be completed by April 1st. And then the hope is that there will be people who are staying in the overflow shelters will be moved directly into homes. But none of the projects that were funded with the $55 million that was appropriated to that fund last year were for families with children. Because the crisis in homeless services at that time were all of the adults without children who were sleeping outside. That was what we were all worried about. And so those were the projects that responded to the request for proposals. Those were the projects that got funded. And then a few months later, we started hearing about children being turned away from the shelter. And so we have done our best to support those proposals. We had an event the first week of the session talking about that, and we've been engaging. The first week of the session, we had an event called Faith, Hunger, and Homelessness Day, where we tried to highlight the importance of that funding request and how it could be transformational for families with kids. I think, and there are some really great proposals for reducing the number of children sleeping in shelters, sleeping in cars, sleeping in tents. But I think the reason that it's very timely to be talking about this now is that the Social Services Appropriations Subcommittee, the subcommittee of the budget, the way the state budget works is that there's a budget committee called the Executive Appropriations Committee, and they write the first draft of the state budget. And it's a great big budget. And so there's a whole bunch of details, and they have a lot of the preliminary work done by subcommittees that focus on specific areas of the state budget. And so there's a Social Services Appropriations Subcommittee that looks at everything from Medicaid funding to job programs for SNAP, people participating in SNAP, to things like housing funding. And I think what is troubling is that when you look at the prioritization that has been finalized by that subcommittee looking at social services needs, the wonderful housing proposals that the governor came up with, they're listed between 28 and 32 in the priority list. They are not, which is to say that their position on the list is one where they will not get funded. That is the way things stand right now. If the Executive Appropriations Committee doesn't do something, if the leaders of the legislature and the governor don't do something, none of that funding will be approved. And out of all of them, the one that is least likely to be approved would be the part that would be most helpful in terms of coming up with solutions for family homelessness. Tara mentioned the $100 million going into that would go into the Fund for Deeply Affordable Housing. It's a little more complicated than that. There's $80 million of that money that comes out, would be funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. And those funds can be used for ongoing housing needs. But don't think they can be used for building something like a second family shelter, which is probably what we need right now. What we need to do, we've converted other motels into ongoing housing. What we need to do is to convert a motel into a second family shelter where every family has a room of their own. But that can't be done with the ARPA money. We need money from the state budget. And that money was listed number 30 on the list. And unlike the other housing proposals, which have the governor as a sponsor and then Representative White, who is one of the two legislators who chairs for the Commission on Housing Affordability, he did not sign off and endorse the 20 million in state funds going into this fund. So there is not a legislative sponsor. There's the governor, and of course the governor is important, but in terms of the legislative process, there's not a legislator who's endorsed that. And so I think that going into these last 2 weeks and 2 days of the session, that money that could be used to help build a second family shelter looks incredibly at risk. I mean, all of the money looks at risk. If there isn't a change, we won't get any of it. Am I wrong? I mean, yeah. No, but, and that's exactly right, because it will change, right? I mean, the recommendations out of the subcommittee never get followed exactly.
Right. And I think, I mean, a different take on it is the fact that because housing are huge numbers, it really shouldn't be in social services. It should be in business and labor, because we're in there with people that they're trying to increase the budget of people who've been on a waiting list for extremely long time for respite care for their adult children. I mean, there's all sorts of items that are in there that are just so more health related. And ours is a big ask. So what I think happened was that they tried for one-time money. What they did was they looked at realistically some of those smaller amounts and put us below them, so those would be really prioritized. Because what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of support around the housing dollars by leadership, which is really a good thing. I also heard that a lot of the freshmen in the House are pushing back on that a little bit. And I've also heard that the $100 million may be pared down. But the hope is if we can get more people talking about the importance of the housing money and investing housing is going to help our school system, is going to help our health system, is going to help people, coming out of prison, all these things, opportunity starts at home, and we need to really be talking about that, that piece. But yeah, it all of a sudden,
I'm not
as
saying
Pamela Atkinson always says, you got to be there till the end, because something can always change.
Every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think the truth of the matter is, though, we are not, last year, there was a lot of housing money that had been proposed by the governor's office, and we looked like it was in good shape until most of it wasn't, right? So I actually think where we're at right now is worse than where we were last year. And so, got invited to an event organized by Congregation Kolami and some other organizations, a Jewish Day at the Capitol on Monday, and President Adams from the Senate came, and he said he was very supportive for the ongoing requests for services, that's really important. But he said he didn't really care about the 100 million because we need to get away from doing structures, services, or what matter.
But I'm going to interrupt, sorry, but he has a request in for $50 million for first-time home buyers.
Right, which is when you look at the racial disparities in home ownership, I can make a good faith argument for expanding opportunity for home ownership for people. There are, but I will tell you, I mean, what's interesting is that we are at a time where when you talk about income inequality, there's this amazing gap that's emerging, not just between the people at the top and everybody else, but the people in the middle and the people in the bottom. When in 2020, the area median income for Salt Lake County was under $80,000. It went up by 25,000 over the last 2 years and is now over 100,000. And so, and yet at the same time, the households served by Housing Connect are still trying to figure out how to make ends meet on $15,000. So the average income for a family right in the middle, the area median income means like the exact middle, right? Those families are earning 102,400. And their income has gone up more in the last 2 years, more than the total income for the people served by Housing Connect. More than, I mean, the average Social Security payment is just under $20,000 a year, right? The average SSDI, Social Security disability insurance payment is less than that. And so there are people who are being left behind right now and are being priced out of a rental market. I mean, we talk about, you know, affordable housing being 80% of area median income. Well, what do you do when the area median income goes up by $25,000 in 2 years for people who their income is still under $25,000? Right? I mean, there are people being left behind, and this deeply affordable housing funding really is the funding to help provide a stable place to live for the people who are being left behind, particularly people experiencing homelessness, people at risk of experiencing homelessness. And that is why we have another project at Crossroads Urban Center called Powerful Moms Who Care, which works to organize and give a voice to women, particularly moms with a lived experience of homelessness. And they organized an event on December 19th that they called the Teddy Bear Rally. That was also a diaper drive outside the Capitol, that worked to highlight the fact that there have been children sleeping outside in the snow up until shortly before the event took place, and that we need to come up with solutions for family homelessness. They are organizing a second Teddy Bear Rally next week on Thursday at 10 outside the House and Senate chambers to remind, there were a few legislators who came to the first Teddy Bear Rally to remind them that that money that the governor proposed, all of it will be spent. We had 55 million last year. There were 168 million in requests, and there were no requests for families with children. We could easily spend 55 million just on statewide initiatives to have a shelter system where no family is in the shelter for more than 3 months.
But I think, you know, some of the things that we need to look at and talk more about is the fact that those particular projects need a lot of money, because when somebody moves in, there's not enough money to cover the entire rent to be able to save, to be able to, you know, do maintenance.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Janice can talk, you know, more to that, but that's a really important thing that is messaging, is that these don't pencil anymore.
Yeah.
And how are we going to make them work? So I always try really hard to point out that our workforce, and that we need to be looking at the infrastructure for them to live and thrive and be able to go to work. But Janice,
I was going to say that, and that's a very nice way to put it. but what we're talking about is housing that the market is not going to build. And if it made sense, the market would have built it. And so we need money for capital to build the housing. And then some of the housing is going to need ongoing subsidy. And you can get that through traditional federal funding, like the Section 8 program. But other states have rental assistance programs, and they are making investments. And we're still talking about trying to get one-time money from them. The fact is we need ongoing rent assistance.
Yeah.
And if we're going to make any headway in addressing the needs around affordable housing, we need all forms of government and the public and private sector to participate. We haven't had, I'll date myself here. So I've been at the Housing Authority over 20 years, and in that time, we have not had a significant increase in our rent assistance programs. We've had, a couple, 25 here, 30 here. Most of them are targeted to specific populations. We'll take any rent assistance we can get. This year, out of some bizarre reason, we got 20 new vouchers, general purpose vouchers, but 20 years, 20 vouchers, that doesn't cut it. The states have to step up, and, ongoing rent assistance. They also need, we need the Housing Trust Fund funded. We need ongoing funding for that. And one of the things that is really hard to talk about, but with the state legislatures, we need tenant rights.
Yeah.
And unless we're helping tenants even the playing field, it's going to be really hard. And it's the fees that Tara was going over in the eviction process. That's a powerful slide. I hadn't seen that before, and that's stunning to me of how quickly somebody life is turned upside down.
So I always start talking about how housing is no longer a shelter, that it is a portfolio. And so, unfortunately, I mean, we have a lot of great landlords that, are local, they own multiple doors, they're very respected. But we also have these portfolios that they don't live here. If you look at the website, the management companies, Asia, other European companies are part of the investors in that portfolio, and they don't care about our community. So, and then I was told one time by somebody says, well, Tara, housing, rental has always been kind of an investment. Well, yes, it has, but not to the degree it is now.
Well,
and
it's the biggest landlord in America is BlackRock. There's a good chance if you have a pension fund, if you have that one of you are a landlord, you have no idea what you own, but you have an ownership interest in rental properties through your 401k that you have no control over, no knowledge of what they are. And so there is a really I think that's different to when you create sort of investment vehicles with dispersed ownership.
they're so far removed. And I think that the other piece is, we have these management companies that are coming in that the owner gives them pretty much carte blanche on, how they manage. And that's where they make money, is the fees. And so when we're talking about tenant rights, we were trying to get those fees just disclosed at the time of when you make application. So that person, what was happening previously is that person would arrive with a U-Haul to pick up the keys and sign the lease. And all of a sudden they have this list of anywhere between, I would say, 50 to $300 extra that they're going to have to pay. And that wasn't part of their budget. And so we did get that pass that they need to be doing that at the time of application, but are they doing it? Because there's nothing to slap their wrist,
Yeah.
in the law. So there was a couple other bills, we're talking about renters' rights was because the vacancy rate is so low, people are having a hard time finding a place. And so what we were requesting was for a tenant to have a 30-day notice if the rent was going up. Because in most leases, the tenant has to give a 60-day notice if they're going to not release to that apartment. And so what can happen is they say, yes, we're going to stay. And then 30 days later, they get the increase in rent. So, how does that kind of work? And depending on who the management company is, they really can go back to their lease and say, no, you have to give us 30 more days and blah, blah, blah. So we need to really take a good look at tenant rights. The other one, there's an eviction bill that is in the mix that just went to Business and Labor in the House. Jenny De La Provost is running that. There's another bill for extending the period of time that a landlord can give a deposit back. But that's just sitting. I heard that they were going to pull that and not run it, but I'm watching it because you never know what's going to happen on that. But those are really three of the bills that, we're kind of addressing the tenant issue. And we're going to continue to, try to just educate around that. Not only our legislators, but our tenants. We need to make sure they understand that when they sign the lease, what that means.
And I think it's
Let me interrupt for a second. This is the easiest panel to moderate because they just talk to each other and I don't have to do anything. But I want to try to rein some of this in and try to give some guidance to our audience to take action, because the three of you are up on the hill all the time. So you've got, a number this and number that, and, this committee, that, and our viewers sitting at home would like to write an email or make a phone call or show up at a rally to maybe make an impact. And I'm hearing there are structural problems with poverty and income inequality that most seriously impacts people's ability to have a safe home that are not going to be solved this year in the legislature. And in fact, we need to take a deep dive into the way our economy is structured. In a capitalist system, the corporations need to make more and more money for the shareholders. And there's no unions or any automatic support for each individual to have enough income to be able to live. We've got a capitalist, housing market, and we've got minimal amount of income for only disabled people, only Social Security people, not people because they're poor. Do what you can. And we're not going to solve that this year, but this is something that we should be working on over the next decade. We've got, I guess, I've heard the hopeful and the depressed here. The governor came up with a great budget asking for $149 million for housing, which isn't just paying somebody to pay rent, but is structural, creating housing, which needs to happen. But I've also heard, oh my gosh, all of the housing requests are way low on the list. They may not even be reached. They weren't reached last year. If we wanted to make one or two calls or show up at one or two rallies, what should we be doing? Is there a bill? Is there advocacy? What? And I'll let each of you, we'll start with Bill and then we'll move down this way.
Well, I've already made a pitch for attending the rally next week, the teddy bear rally. Bring a teddy bear to the Capitol, 10 a.m. on Thursday of next week. I think
That's focusing on the homeless.
that is
Homeless
focusing
families.
on homeless families, I think, is a way of highlighting that there are definitely unmet needs for the housing funding that the governor's proposed. We need as much of it as we can get, and so that is the purpose for that. In terms of the structural stuff that you're talking about, I actually think that going forward, one of the things I've realized is anytime I do this, so I'm doing it right now, it's important to mention that there are policy options that are completely taken off the table. We can't raise the state minimum wage because we're not going to do that. We can't do rent control or rent stabilization. We can't have reasonable landlord tenant laws. So when those things are taken off the table, we're not going to completely solve homelessness and housing instability. But what we can do this session is we can make sure that there aren't kids turned away from the shelter because there's not enough beds for all the families that need help. If we got the full 100 million, we could create housing that we need to move every person over 65 who's currently staying at the shelter into a housing that's more appropriate for them and their needs. There are real,
That's the deeply affordable housing bill.
Yeah.
Let Janice jump in because she's going to give
Well,
you numbers.
I was
maybe.
going to be very brief because what I usually do when I need to do something at the state legislature is I go to the expert. And so I get on Tara's website and I pull up the bills, or I will, a lot of times I'm not an expert at the legislature. I'm a housing practitioner, but I relied on agencies like Utah Housing Coalition and Crossroads Urban Center. So that's what I would do is I'd be watching their website,
But we saw two
But can I-
dozen bills. So I'm
Can I
hearing
just say
deeply
something
affordable
about-
housing.
yeah, I would say the money for housing is critical.
Yeah.
And if it's critical. We absolutely need to develop and subsidize housing.
The
And
governor's bill for the governor's proposal for 149 million, or
That and
deeply
the
affordable?
tax credit,
Yeah.
the
earned income
funding
tax credit.
Yeah. Do you want to pull your slide up, Tara?
Yeah, I was just gonna.
Yeah.
But-
So there's money to fund building housing, and then there's money that it will supplement the state tax credit, which is another way to build affordable housing. And what it does is it will leverage equity. So that $9 million for state tax credits would be compounded over time and would build a lot of affordable housing.
Yeah, that's really important.
So which one are we talking about?
So-
All of this? Some
So
of this?
all of this is what the governor proposed.
Okay.
And I think there's a really good mix of need there, but the 100,000 would really help move the needle when it comes to stabilizing people in their housing that really need stabilizing. I think the 9 million for the low income tax credits and the only Walker financing would be really good at addressing, as Bill says, family housing, because that's where multifamily is usually is built out of. Our tax credits, our federal tax credits is such an important tool in our state. And so also, I hope I didn't come across as saying that homebuyer, we don't need that assistance, but we need both. We need it all.
Yeah.
So let's balance that out. And
So the message would be pass the governor's proposal of 149 million, and out of that, what's most important is the deeply affordable housing of 100, Yolene Walker 15 million, the 9 million for the low income tax credit.
Yep, I would say those are the most important.
Because they address the poorest people
and
and the least stable housing situation.
Can I say something about timing? The reason that we're doing the rally on Thursday is the Executive Appropriations Committee really get serious about the budget starting next week.
Mhm.
The subcommittees are done. The overall committee gets serious next week. They come up with their draft budget the Monday, that following Monday, and then they approve that as a committee, usually on Tuesday. And then the legislature as a whole votes on it. We'll vote on it on Wednesday or Thursday, and then maybe not till Friday. And so, in terms of who you should be talking to, I mean, I think right now, this week, it's too late to talk to the subcommittees because they're done. It's probably too early to talk to the executive appropriations people until next week because they get so much information. You don't want to peak too soon. You want to talk to those people next week so that you can influence what they do over the week following weekend, right? And then with individual legislators who aren't in executive appropriations, they all get to vote after the executive appropriations process finishes. So in terms of the state budget, like we are now in the crunch time where everything happens. And the legislatures by statute has to pass the budget before midnight on 2 weeks from Friday. So this is all going to happen fast. And so if you were going to do an email, I would say if you're going to do an email, make a phone call, like talking to people in the executive appropriations committee about these housing budget items next week. And then, coming to Powerful Moms Who Care rally on Thursday. And then maybe you could talk to your legislator at the Capitol then. But I think, next week, it's all about the budget committee. The week after that, every legislator has a chance to help. But to be honest, really, it's what comes out of the budget committee is what's going to pass.
Yeah.
And so next week, focusing on the people in that committee, and in that committee is the leadership. It's the Senate president. It's the Speaker of the House. It's the House Majority Leader of the House. The Senate Majority Leader.
What I would suggest is go on the website, the legislative website, and you can go right up and it says committees, and then go down to Executive Appropriations Committee, and you will see everyone who's on that committee, and it's linked to their email. If you have a new person on the Hill, I would reach out to them and talk about what is important to you.
Yeah.
And put it in perspective of an experience you've had maybe. But it's really important that you write, I'm your constituent, if you're writing to your member. When you're writing to the executive appropriation, what you want to do is write what you are thinking right in the subject line, and then, put a few sentences. And a lot of times that, unfortunately, they don't have time to read everything, but they have an intern and they're keeping track of how many letters they're getting on certain things.
Okay. I think we may have some questions from the local audience and from the online audience. If you have a question here, come up to this microphone on that other table, can you?
I'd like to make a couple of comments. I think you're missing the elephant in the room, which is the LDS Church. The legislators are majority LDS Church. They are very influenced by the church. And the church's viewpoint on things influences them. And I just like to put that out because nobody ever says it, but it's the truth here in Utah.
They do a lot of rental assistance, the church does. And so they know the need that's out there.
Right. But you can tell by the legislature and the laws that are passed that sometimes that doesn't jive. And I think building affordable, deeply affordable housing is very important. But I think maybe more important at this point is to stop the act of bleeding, which is the evictions, through real concrete rental assistance before people get evicted. And maybe having something where when a tenant, landlords know when a tenant is in trouble. And let the landlord say, notify the tenant. These things are available. See what you can do. Let's work together. Something like that. And because if you, every time you read a story in the Trib about people who have just become homeless, it's because they were evicted.
Right.
And if we could stop that, we might get a handle on some of the other stuff.
I totally agree. And I'm going to just say I'm extremely nervous for the next 4 months because the emergency rental assistance, the federal assistance has run out as of February 5th. So next month and the month after, I think we're going to start seeing some serious numbers when it comes to evictions.
Right.
Because some of the people have been on the subsidy for a long time, and it was a program that paid 100%, not a 0.5%, or, let's do 190, to help people get back on their feet. They just got the 100%. And so I'm really nervous.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we have any questions online, Shauna?
We do.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so this one is kind of two parts, but I'll do the first part first. Do you think it inappropriate that the state and city have provided or / committed millions of dollars to a developer of the Ramada Inn who has made it clear he will be collecting fair market rent around $1,000 per month for a studio and will require that all tenants have vouchers? And before you answer this, me as a moderator, can you just help us all understand a little about what that means as the reader? And then do you think it's appropriate?
I guess what I'm thinking about is, when you're building housing, there's always a gap. And so it's very common for developers to go into the city or county or state and get funding. And in exchange for that, they agree to a certain percentage of area income. I'm not familiar with the Ramada, and I don't understand the piece about vouchers. That piece does not make sense to me, because if they're charging, if you're charging $1,000 for a 1-bedroom or a studio, you're pretty close to what the market is anyways. And our vouchers I'm trying to think what the so our vouchers are right around that anyway, so there'd be no benefit to using a voucher in that place. So that doesn't make sense to me.
Is that one of the new senior housing projects?
No, I don't.
Well, let
No.
me do the follow-up and maybe you can help clarify it. Do you think that shouldn't Salt Lake City and Utah law require all landlords to accept vouchers as in several other states and cities?
We do have
Yeah.
a law. Utah is an income protected state, and landlords cannot discriminate based on source of income, so they shouldn't deny somebody who has a voucher. They should screen them the way they would anybody else.
Anybody else want to say anything?
No, I mean, there have been bills to try to get rid of that because there are people in the legislature who don't like it, and the Utah Housing Coalition led the fight to block those bills from passing. It is part of why it's so important to be engaged with the process. It's not just to pass good things, but it's also to block all of the bad things, because as bad as Utah's landlord tenant law is,
Could be worse.
there are people who have ideas for making it worse.
But I mean, I want to go back to the voucher piece. And one of the things that's important to understand is the vouchers are really gatekeepers of the housing
Yeah.
authorities, and only, you know, a percentage of those vouchers can be used for a project-based voucher. So they're very limited
Yeah.
on the vouchers that are available for any project.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say that there are project-based voucher where projects that have come online in the last few years. And the thing about the voucher, I mean, the tenant, if they charge, the voucher has to be attached to some sort of rent or rate, right? I mean, like you know, you can't just be an open-ended, you know, whatever we can get from the government. You have to actually have a rent that the voucher is pegged to. The landlord, the voucher then says that the tenant can't pay more than 30% of their income toward the rent. And so if 1,000 is more than a third of their income, then the voucher pays it down to what a third of their income would be. That's the way the vouchers work. And for some of the, and so for some of the new permanent supportive housing projects, the vouchers are part of how the rent gets paid, despite the inability of a lot of people living in permanent supportive housing to pay the rent. That rent has to be pegged to something. So that's, and you know, I mean, $1,000 per unit is not that much if that's all you have to maintain the building, so it's habitable for 20 years or 30 years. I mean, so that's why, and so it depends. I mean, I'd have to, I'm not familiar with that project, but there are projects like it where, that are, you know, I mean, where when you look at it more closely, you realize, well, okay, I mean, do I want to have something where there's no rent for a year? Or do I want to have something where the rent is capped at 30% of the tenant's income for 30 years, right? I mean, because I mean, housing is an expensive thing to maintain.
Are there any other questions, Shauna?
I do have some like more the person who asked the question is providing more background, but I also want to make sure we have time to address some other issues. And then I have another separate question.
Why don't we do another separate question? Because I think our panel isn't as familiar with that particular project to actually be helpful in answering this person's one question.
Okay, great. Let's see here. Okay, so another question is, what do you guys each think about cities building mixed income, affordable social housing rather than subsidizing or giving other breaks to developers that get them to provide some affordable units? And kind of by way of, you know, parenthetically, also cities have very little control over the architecture of units built for developers. Shouldn't the interest we all have in the quality of the built environment militate in favor of cities directly building social housing so that our elected officials are accountable for architectural quality, as well as with the world-class Salt Lake City main library designed?
So I'll start it out. So a couple things is cities are zoning is local. And so cities have a lot of control over what is built and the quality and how it is, you know, how it is built. That's one of the things that's really frustrating is that, you know, we have a lot of single family zoning and we have a multifamily need. And so, you know, so we would like to see cities do more. The other thing that was said is cities building housing. Cities, as far as I'm aware of, cities don't build housing. That's one of the reasons why housing authorities are in existence is they work with the cities. They're kind of that arm to help cities build housing when they want to. A lot of times, cities provide money and they contract with developers to do a certain type of housing.
When it comes to social housing, I think that we have some social housing projects in the Salt Lake City area, and some of them were developed and operated by Housing Connect. Housing Connect is not a for-profit developer. They are a housing authority. They're also a developer. They are a developer. They have projects like the Bodie that are mixed income that and they are owned for the public benefit. And so they have you, and so I mean, if that's if we want to see more of that, I mean, where we have housing that's mixed income, but it's not run for profit, we certainly could invest, invest in housing authorities to do more of that. We could invest in, I think, it is a good question whether it makes sense for Salt Lake City to continue to put as much of its limited funding for affordable housing into partnerships with for-profit developers, when they could be working more with developers like Housing Connect. But I think
I'm going to disagree with Bill.
I'm
There are a lot of good for-profit developers that are doing mixed income housing.
Well, and there's
as well.
a capacity need in
Yep.
terms of right
Yep.
now, anybody who can do the development should.
Yeah, I think that the capacity is the biggest thing right now. There's not,
We need
and
money.
cities in the city, but it would take Salt Lake City years to figure out how to become a major developer. And so it's
Keep going.
no, I mean, but social housing, I mean, that's a model. There are people who are very excited about it. It's actually, there are examples of it that are happening here. So it is, and I think that it's not a bad idea to think about how we can have, I think too often when nonprofit developers build projects, they don't think of having them be mixed income, even though, like, if it works for for-profit developers, the reason you like a mixed income project for for-profit developers is if you charge a higher rent to the higher income people, that helps reduce the cost of maintenance for the lower income units, and it also provides more money for maintaining those units. And so, and I mean those social housing, I mean, has has the ability to not to impose rent control on itself. And so to not consistently increase the rent at double the rate of inflation. No matter inflation's at 10%, we will raise rents by 20%. Inflation's 20%, we'll raise it by 50%. They've got to be at least double inflation. That's the way it's been for 20 years. And so there are advantages to social housing. Scaling up to where it could be a significant part of the housing market is something that would require more money than Salt Lake City has.
Yes, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say something about the architecture. I think that if this is an architect asking the question, I think they should become more involved, because we do have some really good housing out there, but it also is dictated by people who respond to the RFPs that nonprofits or for-profits put out.
So, one different topic, but many of the people in the league, in our local league, the Salt Lake League, we spend a lot of time observing planning commission meetings and city council meetings. And it would be great if you could speak to what we should be doing at the local level with our municipalities, what our observers should be watching for, and what we should be saying to our city councils and our mayors.
Well, I think they should be very supportive of development and be a YIMBY, yes in my backyard, not no in my backyard. I think that is the biggest problem that we have, is that, every city, has the same people that show up and will be barking. And And it's sometimes unfortunate because it's almost like crying wolf, you know? Um, so by talking about the benefits of people being in higher opportunity areas, not in a food desert, those things are really important to be supporting. And so, yes, in my backyard, and get your neighbors there when the others are there.
Yeah, we do a lot of siting of affordable housing, and it's a daunting process. What works best is when cities go through a planning process and they identify where they want to have density and what that looks like, and then we can work with their planning department and administratively. But when we have to go in and ask for a conditional use permit, um, it's very difficult, and it's helpful. There's a misconception that if you're building affordable housing near somebody, like a LIHTC project or density, that will negatively impact somebody's property value. And there's studies out there that show that's not the case. And so that's one of the things that I think would be a good a talking point, is that we need all kinds of housing in communities.
And I think,
Okay, I think we've exhausted the questions. I want to give everyone like 2 minutes to make a wrap-up statement. If you still have enough energy to make a wrap-up statement, then we'll thank you. And I've got a couple league announcements. Why don't we start in the order we did this, Tara?
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the subjects that are so dear to me. And please reach out to the coalition. Rollins@xmission.com is very easy. Rollins@xmission.com. And I'd be happy to put you on our mass emailing list. We do education. We just had a really good panel on really the forecast of, developing housing. And so we do a lot of different things. And plus, you'll get our update every week about the legislative session.
Thank you. Janice?
I firmly believe that this is a crisis, and we are at a point where we need to do something different. The other thing, I do think we just need to educate ourselves. I've been doing this 20 years, and I feel like I'm still learning. One of the things I would suggest is following Utah Housing Coalition, but they also do a great Housing Matters conference that really helps people get up to speed. So
It is good. Well, I just want to apologize again. Had I realized I was going to cough this much, I wouldn't have tried to call in from Zoom or something. I'm sorry. Come to the Teddy Bear Rally Part 2 on next week. I think it is really important at this point in the session to be nice, but unmissable. Like and so that is what it's going to be. There are going to be people. You can be one of the many people standing with teddy bears outside the Senate chamber, the House chamber, there to talk to legislators about making this the session where this session, if we don't do anything else, we need to make sure that we improve the shelter system, the homeless services system for families with kids, so that there aren't any children turned away because there's not space at the shelters in future winters. That's something we can do. We can't do anything, but it would be a shame if we didn't do that this session.
Thank you all. Now, some brief announcements. Our unit meetings. The Night Owls will meet on the fourth Monday of the month, which is the next Monday, February 27th at 7:30 p.m. at the Holiday Library, and on Zoom to discuss tonight's topic, housing and homelessness. Maybe too late for the session, but not too late for city councils and other things. The Summit Wasatch County Unit meeting is on the last Tuesday of the month. This month, it will be Tuesday, February 28th at 11 a.m. on Zoom. The topic is extreme partisan gerrymandering in Utah, the lawsuit, and the speaker will be Better Boundaries, Katie Wright. The town club meets the first Thursday of the month, which I guess Thursday of the month, yes, which is March 7th at 11 a.m. in person at the town club. The town club will be hearing about this gun safety study. This program is followed by an optional lunch with payment and RSVPs in advance. If you want to attend, please contact Kathy Bailey. Our next general meeting will be Wednesday, March 15th at 6 p.m., same time, same place, to do the legislative wrap-up. We'll see whether we have good news or bad news. And then our April meeting, which is the third Wednesday in April, will be discussing public health, what we learned from the pandemic, what we've messed up, and what we need to do better before the earthquake. And on that optimistic note, thank you all.